My mom locked me in a soundproof closet and drugged me to keep me quiet, then blamed it on her mental health. I spoke up, proved it, and she was convicted. I rebuilt my life. Now 5 years later, she just reached out. I don't owe her a single word. I grew up thinking my sister was untouchable, a golden child who could do no wrong. But a lifetime of injustice and a shocking act of abandonment would finally push me to my breaking point and change everything. They say unlike real gold, kids raised as golden children never turn out to be as pure as their parents see them. And that was tragically true for my sister. Growing up, she always got her way. No matter how nasty or irrational she acted towards me, she just always got away with it. Why? Because she was the golden miracle child, and stunningly beautiful with her thick, curly hair and light eyes. My mom spent a lifetime comparing our looks. I have dark eyes and straight hair, and I was just never as pretty. Mom loved making comments, constantly telling me to try and dress like my sister, or asking her to teach me makeup. But my sister? Oh, she'd just bully me and make fun of me if I ever dared to ask for help. That's how we grew up. Deeply, utterly resentful of each other. I think my sister absorbed our mother's worst traits. I rejected them. Being constantly put on a pedestal just for her looks turned her into a rotten, selfish person who thought she could get away with anything. My mom's incessant comparisons and put-downs absolutely wrecked my self-esteem. As an adult, I'm quiet, reserved. Some people even call me a pushover. I've been going to therapy, trying to grow a stronger spine, but it's been incredibly hard. The way my family treated me really screwed me up. I struggle to maintain healthy friendships or romantic relationships. I mean, get this, my sister even slept with my boyfriend in senior year of high school. For no reason. She never even liked him. She told me countless times she thought he was ugly. When my parents found out, they told me to let bygones be bygones. My sister wasn't even disciplined. That was the moment I truly understood how much they preferred her over me. My dad just standing by watching my mom emotionally tear me down my entire life. It made me feel like no man would ever stand up for me, or see my worth. It's why trust and connection are so incredibly hard for me when dating. But my life wasn't entirely awful because of them. Being the ugly sister meant I had zero social life, which meant I spent all my time studying. I ended up graduating high school with a perfect 4.0 GPA and landed a full ride to my number one choice university. This was huge, especially after my mom told me the night before I started high school that she was paying for my sister's college since she was the eldest, but I'd have to go to community college and pay my own way. I remember sobbing, asking her why she didn't love me like she loved my sister. She insisted she did, but my sister deserved it more because she was her firstborn. The day I landed that scholarship, I was ecstatic. Part of me was probably a little happy to have something my sister didn't. She'd spent all of high school partying, earning terrible grades, and facing absolutely no consequences from our parents. She was only going to college because they could pay for it, and it wasn't even a good one because her grades were so crap. So when I rushed home to tell my family about my full ride to a prestigious university, I'd never been so excited to share good news. But when I told them, all my dad said was good job. My mom? She didn't even look up from her phone or give me any response. Then she ignored me for an entire week. I tried to ask her why she was mad at me for getting a scholarship. She literally just avoided eye contact and walked into another room. It was like she hated me for earning my scholarship, when most parents would be thrilled. Whatever. That's when I started to understand just how alone I was, how isolated my family wanted me to feel. I didn't understand why. Why had my mom even had me just to spend a lifetime hating me and, in turn, making me hate myself? That day, the day I got my scholarship, turned into one of the worst days of my life. I cried myself to sleep, accepting that I would never have a family that truly loved me. Not like they loved my sister. And I despised her for it. That night, I wrote in my journal until the sun rose, about what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. I was tired of being this sad little girl. I decided right then, I was going to transform every ounce of rage I had into academic success. Instead of throwing myself a pity party, begging for their love and attention, I was going to redirect all my focus and energy to my studies, as I always had. I would give myself something they never could. I was going to be stable, independent, intelligent, and educated even if I might never be loved. And that's exactly what I did. I graduated with honors. I got a fantastic position at a company I'd interned for right out of college, and I've been making six figures since I turned 23. When I came home for the holidays, I'd tell my family how I was doing. I'd get random compliments from extended family members, but my own parents? They never ever went out of their way to acknowledge or congratulate me. As an adult, I knew better than to tell my mom about my high position or how much I was making. I knew it would just make her resent me more. But I told my dad, and one year he actually told me he was happy for me. It was the nicest thing either of my parents had ever said to me. But even as an adult, my mom still treated me like an unwanted guest. Even though I only saw them during the holidays, she would do everything in her power to get the attention off me if anyone asked me a question or directed the conversation my way. For example, one Christmas dinner, my uncle congratulated me on a promotion I'd told him about earlier. It was my second promotion and I'd gotten a significant raise. I'd been telling him how I was looking into buying my first house. When he mentioned the promotion and the house, a few other family members actually seemed genuinely kind and congratulated me. My cousin even asked what area I was house shopping in. That's when my mom cut me off. "This is boring, can we change the conversation?" she said. Then under her breath I heard her mutter, "It's probably not even true anyway." I ended up buying my house later that year. When I posted about it on social media, everyone in my family liked the post, except my mom. I knew she was probably furious. See, my sister was having a completely opposite life experience. She'd gone to college, all paid for by my parents, but failed out and got pregnant by her first college boyfriend. I had a sneaking suspicion my parents had even asked her to get rid of the pregnancy, but she kept it, trying to make it work with a baby daddy she'd known for 4 months. Turns out they were completely incompatible. But that didn't stop them from trying to fix their relationship by having another kid. I remember having to hold back tears when I saw her posting about her second child, knowing that baby was probably being born into a toxic environment. My sister was awful, and so was her baby dad. I'd met him at the holidays, but he never even bothered to remember my name or make conversation. And every year, he'd bring home trays of food, despite never bringing anything to the holidays. Obviously, my sister and I's relationship did not improve. We barely spoke once we'd both moved out. We had each other on social media, and the few times we'd see each other for holidays, my sister would make nasty comments about my weight or my clothes. Honestly, I think she was just projecting. I wear a lot of designer clothes and I like cycling through my designer purses, and she'd constantly ask me what fake purse I brought this time. One Thanksgiving, the moment I walked in the door, she looked me up and down and said verbatim, "I see you're dressed up again like the stuck-uppy asterisk you are." It was ridiculously rude and uncalled for. And she would constantly insult me right in front of her young kids, using curses and everything. I don't feel bad saying my sister is pure trash, and I didn't feel bad for anything I did after she dumped her kids on my doorstep. Out of nowhere. I was just relaxing one weekend morning after a long work week when my doorbell rang. I was completely shocked to see my sister's 10 and 7-year-old sons standing on my porch, holding overnight bags. When I asked what they were doing, they said their mom was going on vacation for 8 weeks and that I was watching them. 8 weeks. My sister and I hadn't spoken since our July 4th barbecue, where she told me not to have more than one plate because she was sick of staring at my muffin top. I had no idea why she thought I'd be her free babysitter for 2 months. My nephews were good, quiet kids and they were clearly confused too, so I let them inside while I started calling my sister. She ignored my first 10 calls, but I kept at it until she finally answered. As soon as she picked up, I flat out told her there was no way I was watching her kids. If she wasn't here to pick them up herself as soon as possible, I was calling CPS. I was literally Googling the number for Child Protective Services, while I had her on speaker when she dropped a bombshell. Her voice got incredibly deep and scary as she blackmailed me. She said she would call my job and inform them I wasn't taking my bipolar medication, and get me fired. My sister was an idiot who didn't understand anything about my job but my career. It was the most important thing to me. I couldn't risk anyone threatening my position. I just hung up after she said that, my head ready to explode from stress. Not only could I not watch her kids, but I had a trip planned a month from then, to visit my long-distance boyfriend Eric, all the way in Australia, and meet his family for the first time. We'd been dating for a while, and I'd been anticipating this trip all year. It was so important. He was introducing me to his mom and dad, and I wanted it to go perfectly. Now my life was thrown into chaos, all because of my sister. I had no idea what I was going to do. I had no idea who else to call other than my mom. And I shouldn't have been surprised when she sided with my sister, just like she always had. I told my mom that my sister hadn't even bothered to drop her own kids off, and she just said they were old enough to come to my house alone anyway. My mom started guilting me, saying my sister had done a lot for me, and that I needed to be there for her just this one time since I never was. That made me lose my mind. I screamed at her at the top of my lungs, demanding she tell me one single time my sister had been there for me or improved my life in any way. I told my mom that both she and my sister had never been there for me, had treated me like some unwashed dog instead of their own family. I demanded my mom come to my house. Worst case scenario, I'd leave her to be my nephew's caretaker while I flew to Australia. I had very little hope my sister would abandon her trip. When my mom finally got to my place, she was cold as ever, looking at me with the same hateful eyes. We sat down and my mom explained I was being an awful sibling as always, and lectured me about family being there for each other. I ignored all her hypocritical crap and demanded to know what kind of vacation was so important that my sister would forget her kids and leave them with someone who essentially hated her. I told my mom everything about this was weird and suspicious. My sister disappearing for 8 weeks out of nowhere, leaving 2 young kids behind, made no sense. I wanted the truth if I was going to be involved without my consent. That's when my mom's face changed. Eventually, she admitted it. My sister wasn't just going on some vacation. She was actually being flown out by her sugar daddy. I literally laughed, thinking she was joking, but her face was dead serious. I was so emotionally exhausted at that point. I freaked out on my mom. How could she be okay with this? I told her she'd raised a complete loser of a daughter, who left the country to go see a sugar daddy instead of just getting a job to support her kids. My mom, of course, threw all my words back in my face, defending my sister as she always had. At one point, she even said it didn't matter how much money I had, or how nice my house was, that I would always just be the ugly duckling compared to my sister. Born ugly, and you'll die ugly. After she said that, I had to physically restrain myself from grabbing her by the shirt and throwing her out of my house. When I screamed at my mom to get the hell out, she yelled back that she wasn't going anywhere. When I tried to direct her out of the room, she pushed me with all her strength into a coffee table that held one of my favorite vases. My boyfriend had gifted it to me on his last visit, and it was one of my most cherished possessions. After my mom pushed me, it fell to the floor and shattered into a million little pieces. Seeing that vase destroyed, it made me feel just as broken. I think I had a full-on mental breakdown. I started screaming and crying at my mom, telling her to get out, that I was calling the police. I still feel bad because my nephews could definitely hear me from the other room, but I was a mess at that point. It had been such a long, painful day. After I finally managed to get my mom out, my nephews poked their heads out of the room. Their eyes were so wide, they looked so nervous and sad. It just broke my heart. Even though I didn't know them well, they were just kids with a mess of a mother, and I felt so incredibly sorry for them. That moment, I ordered DoorDash for all of us and let them watch movies and play video games in my living room until they passed out. Later, when I finally got through to my sister, I immediately started yelling, bringing up CPS again. She just gave me this sinister laugh and told me again it was my choice. Either watch her kids or lose my job. At one point, she hissed that she knew I was nothing without my job, and I'd go back to being a loser without it. This stung me right in the heart because it was the honest truth. I had my degree and a solid resume, but I truly identified with my career success, and I would do anything not to lose it. At that point I was crying, asking my sister why she hated me so much, why she'd abandoned her little kids for a sugar daddy. She just said she was the type of woman who could make millions from a sugar daddy in 2 months, and that was something I'd never have to worry about. I think she was just trying to break me down, make me feel small. And it was working. We went back and forth for a while until she literally hung up on me after a final threat of contacting my job. I just broke down in tears again, realizing I had no power against her. My nephews were downstairs watching a movie, so I had privacy upstairs. I decided to call my boyfriend. I hadn't had a chance to talk to him since the kids were dropped off, and I ended up breaking down, venting about every detail. I couldn't hold back tears as I told him about my sister's threats and my mom's continued disrespect. How completely trapped I felt. Even though he was on the other side of the planet, Eric made me feel so loved and supported. He was literally the only person in my corner, and I'm so grateful for him. He said my sister was potentially committing multiple crimes by abandoning her kids and threatening me with career blackmail. He said I needed solid evidence. He suggested I contact my sister again, tried to get her to repeat her threat about the false medical accusations, but this time secretly record the conversation. As evidence, Eric knew about my past with my sister and my mom, and pointed out my sister was clearly unhinged. It wouldn't take much for her to act on this threat, and I needed to be prepared. Of course that freaked me out, but he was 100% right. I knew my sister was insane more than anyone, and I decided to go with his plan, even though I was still feeling incredibly overwhelmed. But I still wanted my nephews to feel comfortable and cared for. I knew what it felt like to be a child in a home where you weren't wanted. I didn't ever want to make these innocent little boys, who were related to me, feel that way. I ended up going downstairs and playing a multiplayer video game with them for a while. It ended up being really fun. They were so surprised when I knew how to play first-person shooters, and were so cute, giggling and laughing watching me get kill after kill. I wasn't expecting to bond with them after such a stressful weekend, but when we all ordered pizza and had a contest to see who could eat the most pepperoni, I realized I honestly loved those two little boys. They were nothing like their mom. Even though I knew my sister couldn't have been a great parent, they were both super polite. And even though it took a little while for them to come out of their shells, they were both really sweet, funny little boys. They were very good about cleaning up and were always saying please and thank you. As I was hanging out with them, I noticed they both had holes in their socks, and my older nephew's clothes looked sort of small on him. I looked through the rest of the clothes my sister had packed, and realized they were all either old or too small. Again, I wasn't incredibly surprised that my sister was a cheap, neglectful parent. I decided to take them to the mall for some new wardrobes. I almost cried multiple times during that trip. My nephews completely came out of their shells, running around the mall so excited and happy. I remembered what it felt like to be a neglected child, and I just wanted them to feel like they could have anything they wanted, that I was there for them, and wanted to make them happy. So anytime we walked past a window and they wanted to go in a store, we would go in, and I kept buying them whatever they wanted. It was impossible not to. My youngest nephew was missing his 2 front teeth, and every time he gave me his goofy little empty smile, my heart ached, and I had to buy him another little treat or toy. They left the mall that day with new clothes that looked great and fit comfortably, and I'd also bought them both Nintendo Switches. It was so hard not to spoil them. I didn't have kids of my own, and I had plenty of money. When I bought them the Switches, both of them broke down crying and hugged me. I noticed the 10-year-old had started crying again during our ride home, and I asked him if he was okay. He looked at me through his tears and asked me why I was being so nice to them, and why they deserved it. I told him that they deserved my kindness because they were my boys too, and that they were kids, and that alone meant they deserved to be happy. This only seemed to make him cry harder, and he told me he was feeling angry at his mom for keeping us apart. This broke my heart. I told him I was sorry we hadn't been able to get to know each other before, but I was really happy he and his brother were here with me now, even if I hadn't expected it. I asked him about his home life, and it was exactly as I expected. Both my nephews slowly started to open up to me about how poorly their mom treated them. My heart felt like it shattered into a million pieces. I knew my sister and her baby dad were horrible, but it was another thing to hear it straight from their mouths, and hear the pain in their voices. When we got home, I cooked a big dinner, and they played on their Switches for the rest of the night. I left them alone in the living room and went to my room to call my sister again, ready to execute Eric's plan. This time I tried my best to stay calm and collected, even though I wanted to call her every name in the book. It wasn't difficult to steer the conversation towards the medical accusation. As soon as I brought up CPS again, my sister freaked out and threw the threat in my face, insisting I'd be fired for being a crazy in secret, saying she didn't care if I was actually taking my medication or not. Nobody was going to know if she was lying, she kept telling me. Nobody would believe a crazy asterisk like me, and you don't deserve your job anyway. Honestly, I think my sister might have been on drugs during this call. She sounded strung out and just kept repeating crazy phrases. After I'd gotten what I needed, I hung up on her as she kept repeating, "You don't deserve anything in this life. You don't deserve anything." Over and over. Whatever. I pushed her words out of my mind as I made sure I had recorded the entire call successfully. I had my sister on audio saying she was going to make false medical accusations to my employer. I realized how genius my boyfriend had been to suggest getting this recording, and I started emotionally preparing myself for the fallout if my sister followed through. After getting the recording, I tried my best to calm down and put my nephews to bed. The next morning before they woke up, I called CPS as soon as the line opened. I reported the entire situation, explaining how my sister had abandoned her children, how we were completely estranged. I even went so far as to say she hadn't just abandoned them, but left them under completely false pretenses, then used manipulation and coercion to force me to care for them. I was surprised that CPS was actually pretty helpful. I shared the recording with them. The agent listened and said it was clear my sister was using blackmail to neglect her children, and was certainly committing a litany of crimes. They informed me they'd be opening an investigation immediately, and my sister would be contacted ASAP. I was shaking after the call, trying to decompress, spending the rest of the day with my nephews, relaxing and bonding. My mom ended up calling me the next day. I really have no idea why I even picked up. I think I was just still so disoriented and emotionally vulnerable. We ended up getting into another huge fight over the phone. I let it slip that I had called CPS, and that my sister would finally pay for the way she treated me. My mom hung up as soon as I said that. I'll be honest, I was shaking after those calls. Just making the CPS call was nerve-wracking, and then fighting with my mom and telling her about CPS felt like a huge mistake. I didn't regret calling CPS, but I knew my mom would do anything to protect my sister, and that she didn't care about my nephew's safety, just the same as my sister. All I really knew about my mom was that she hated me and she loved my sister. I was sure what would happen next. There was absolutely no way my mom wasn't going to immediately contact my sister, try to put her 2 steps ahead of me. I was sure she'd hung up to call my sister immediately. I had a sleepless night. The next morning at work, my receptionist informed me my supervisor had scheduled a meeting with me before lunch. Urgent. As nervous as I was, I knew it was coming. My sister was crazy and it was clear all she wanted to do was ruin my life. I sat down in the meeting, cracking my knuckles to relieve tension. My 2 supervisors were there, and a higher-up I'd never met. All of them looked at me with suspicion. I felt like a bug under a microscope. Sure enough, they explained they'd been contacted by a trusted source within my family, informed that I was potentially unmedicated for a severe mental illness. They even gave extreme details about past mental breaks I'd had, and were concerned about a psychotic break in the office. But neither they nor my sister knew how prepared I was. Of course, I knew my sister would follow through. She'd always hated me, and robbing me of my high-paying position would be the ultimate screw you to her ugly little sister. She'd revel in it. If I hadn't been watching her nephews, or even if I hadn't called CPS, I'm sure she would have held it over my head, blackmailing me into doing whatever she wanted. So, in a way, I was happy to be dealing with this, getting my sister's crap out of the way. I took out my briefcase and gave all the supervisors a copy of my doctor's letter, with attached documentation proving I'd been diligently following my medication regimen. There was proof going back almost 5 years that I'd never missed a prescription pickup, and that my medication had been regular as well as my moods. I had verification from not only my primary care physician, but my therapist and psychiatrist as well. I gave them an informative but concise explanation of my family issues and my sister's mental health struggles, and informed them the claims were completely unfounded. They could be sure of my stability based on all the medical paperwork. My supervisors took a while to look through everything, but as soon as they saw I had medical evidence from multiple doctors, they seemed completely satisfied. They even apologized to me for the inconvenience, explaining they just had a responsibility to do their due diligence before closing the matter. One supervisor even used the opportunity to congratulate me on my successful quarter, bragging about my performance to the others, which made me look excellent. I literally left the meeting giggling, thinking about how poorly my sister's moronic plan had backfired. I could barely focus for the rest of the day. I kept smiling dumbly every time I thought about calling my sister after work and telling her what a bust her plan was. I called her as soon as I got to my car. I almost cried laughing as I told her the meeting took 15 minutes because she sounded so crazy and stupid, and my bosses had never believed her in the first place. My sister was enraged, accused me of lying, and said she was sure I'd been fired and was just trying to save face. This made me laugh harder. I told her she'd failed at trying to get me fired, just like she'd failed at everything else in her life. I told her the only skills she had, as a woman pushing 40, were lying and failing, and that even her own children were disappointed in her. My sister lost it again. She just kept calling me the B word and the C word over and over, claiming I'd completely betrayed her. She said she was hopping on the first plane back and was going to make me regret every single thing I'd done. I was still laughing after the call, but by the time I got home and reunited with my nephews, who were in a much better mood since getting dropped off at my place, I realized this whole situation was far from over and might get worse before it got better. All I knew for sure was that my sister was completely out of her mind, and now she was flying home from another country for revenge. I was honestly terrified. My sister basically had nothing to lose, she'd always been unhinged, and I started to fear for my safety. Then I started thinking about my nephews. Had I made a mistake calling CPS? A huge part of me wished my sister had lost her passport overseas and never came home. I'd grown so close to my nephews in those days, and my heart was already breaking at the thought of them leaving. I didn't want to say goodbye. I definitely didn't want to watch them walk back into my sister's arms. Arms that perpetuated the same neglect my mom had shown me. In that moment, I realized I hated her more than anyone on earth. I checked on my sleeping nephews, couldn't sleep myself, my mind racing. I cried quietly in the hallway after closing their door. They were such innocent little boys, and they didn't deserve any of this. The next day was a complete *T show. I was woken to the sound of somebody pounding on my door, like they were slapping a sandbag over and over. When I opened it, there was my sister next to a guy who had to be maybe 6 feet 5 inches and weighed almost 300 pounds. He was gigantic, one of his hands the size of my entire head. I could barely see my mom standing right behind him. Before I could even open my mouth to tell them to get the hell off my property, the man put his hand on my shoulder and shoved me down with all his might. My sister, my mom, and the stranger all made their way inside my house, and I was collapsed on the floor, soreness sinking into my shoulder. I immediately started screaming at my sister for bringing this stranger to my house, screaming at him not to touch me, but he seemed to speak only Russian. I had no idea how this was even happening. Then I realized. My sister had beaten CPS to my house. They were scheduled for around 11 a.m. that day, but my sister had busted my door down at 8 a.m. My nephews had been woken up by all the commotion and were walking out of the guest room with sleepy eyes. I tried to get in between them to protect them from the stranger, but my sister barked at the man to go put my nephews in the car. It was complete chaos. Once they realized what was happening, both my nephews started asking my sister to leave them with me. I tried again to pull my oldest nephew out of the huge stranger's arms, but this time he grabbed my head and threw it into the wall. I saw stars as I sank to the floor and watched him carry my 2 little nephews out of my house. There was nothing I could do. My mom was crying too, but she left with them as well. Before they all walked out, my sister walked over to me as I held my head in my hands. When I looked up at her, she spit at me square in the face. It was the most disgusting thing anyone's ever done to me, and one of the worst days of my life. They all drove off in this giant black Suburban I'd never seen my sister in before. I had no idea who the man was, and I couldn't believe the trauma my sister had just inflicted. She hadn't even let them take any of their stuff. They left without clothes, without their switches, no breakfast. My heart broke for them and I had an anxiety attack like never before. I didn't realize how much it would hurt to care so much for my nephews. I seriously loved those boys with all my heart, and I just wanted to protect them and make sure they were cared for like I never had been at their age. But now they were scared and shoeless, in some random car with my psychotic sister and a humongous stranger. I was so disgusted with my mom's behavior. I couldn't believe she just stood by, watching that huge man toss me around in my own home and pull my nephews out of their aunt's house without a word. I couldn't believe how evil my family had become, and I couldn't stop thinking about my nephews. After I calmed down, I realized I needed to snap into action. Time was of the essence and I was running out of it. When I finally came to my senses, I immediately called the police. It turned out they were already aware of an ongoing investigation because CPS had an open case against my sister. I gave them all the details of what had just transpired. The officer on the line was incredibly helpful. My voice was shaking, but I tried to stay steady and focused as I described the stranger. I racked my mind trying to remember the license plate. Luckily, because of how much responsibility I have in my job, I was used to picking up on and remembering little details. I somehow managed to remember every single number and letter on that Suburban's license plate. I gave the cops a description of the stranger, the full license plate, and a description of what my mom and sister were wearing. I truly think my sister was high on some sort of uppers when she came to my house that morning. She looked absolutely feral with this wild look in her eyes. I think she'd been doing substances since she'd landed overseas. My sister was crazy, but it was like something snapped in her. I'd never seen her act so truly unhinged and detached from reality. After I gave the cops every single little detail I could remember, I hung up and did my best to take my mind off things. But I literally could not focus on anything else. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't nap, couldn't watch TV. I just kept seeing my little nephew's faces every time I closed my eyes. All I could think about was making sure they were okay. I thought more about my mom, why she'd always made excuse after excuse for my sister, how it had enabled her to become a truly evil person. I even found myself thinking about my sister's trip, wondering what kind of stuff she'd done there, if she really had a sugar daddy and how much he'd paid her. Was the money she'd made on her trip truly worth all this? I even found myself thinking about what it would be like if it was just me and my nephews. I had the room for them, and now I definitely had the room for them in my heart as well. The more I thought about it, the more I wanted that outcome. My sister out of the picture and just me and my nephews. I could give them everything my sister couldn't. And if my sister and I ended up in front of a judge in a custody battle, the judge would be staring at one woman with an overseas sugar daddy, and another with multiple degrees and a penthouse office. I tried to think positive, but random dark anxieties about my nephew's safety kept leaking into my mind. Was the giant man she brought my sugar daddy? Was he with my nephews? I had just been lying on my couch, staring at the ceiling, overthinking, not realizing how much time had passed, when I finally got a call back from the police station. They'd been searching for the Suburban for hours and finally found them. The officer who called me back was the same one from earlier, and continued to be very helpful, sharing a lot of details. He told me they had 3 different police cars on the scene when they pulled over the black SUV, since they knew the man had already been violent that morning. Sure enough, even with firearms drawn on him, the man ran forward trying to attack an officer, and ended up getting hit in the thigh. He punched 2 officers in the head and gave a female officer a black eye. My sister had also physically attacked the officer who tried to handcuff her initially. I tried to picture it. My insane sister and the giant stranger physically battling a group of cops on the shoulder of the highway. I could not believe something like this was actually happening in my family, and I wasn't just watching it on reality TV. I was still reeling in shock from everything the officer shared about my sister's arrest, when he began telling me my sister actually wanted to speak to me. I couldn't believe my ears. He confirmed she was sure she wanted to use her one call on me. I asked if he thought she'd ask for bail money. He was honest. Yes, that's what she was screaming about. I told him I wasn't even going to take her call. She could rot in there for all I cared. The officer ended up giving me an understanding laugh, and I finally finished the call without speaking to my sister. It was a complete mess. Even though my sister was finally behind bars where she belonged, I found out my nephews were in CPS protection. And although they were safe, I was so worried. I also only had a week until my Australia trip, and if I didn't go, I'd be losing thousands and thousands of dollars in bookings. As I'd mentioned, canceling this trip would have looked extremely disrespectful to my boyfriend's family before I even got a chance to meet them. I planned on marrying my boyfriend one day, and the last thing I wanted was to give his family a bad first impression. I called CPS to check on my nephews, just asking if I could speak with them, but they didn't let me. I tried to explain I was family, some of the only mentally stable family they had, but they didn't care. I was dealing with a different department than I'd contacted before, and they were relentless. At that point, I was completely emotionally exhausted and had officially run out of options. I spent the rest of the week trying my best to prepare for my trip, while continuing to burst out in random tears as I remembered my nephews and thought about where they might be. I felt so bad because my boyfriend and I had been so excited for this trip for so long. And now it was finally here. And I was completely distracted and full of anxiety. All our conversations ended up being about how nervous and tense I felt. Even though Eric was incredibly kind and supportive as always, I was so angry at my sister for how she treated her nephews and me. I couldn't believe how disrupted my life had become because of her one choice to go visit her stupid sugar daddy. I was so thankful my job had been understanding, but just thinking about how quickly my sister had tried to get me fired made me feel so betrayed and distrustful of anybody in my family. Even my dad was off somewhere not getting involved, though he surely was aware. Spineless, just like my useless mom. My mom didn't even care about her grandchildren. She'd enabled my sister's idiotic choices, and that had led to her grandchildren being in the custody of strangers. I was sitting at the bar at the airport on the day of my flight, 2 cocktails deep, when I started looking at some photos of my nephews I'd taken. We'd taken these silly photo booth pictures at the mall, and I couldn't help but start crying all over again over how much I loved and missed them. I decided that would be the last time I cried until I landed back in America. I told myself I really needed to try my best to enjoy the time with my boyfriend and his family. I had a life too, and I couldn't let my sister ruin my time, even from across the globe. My time in Australia ended up going amazingly. I hadn't seen Eric in months, and when he ran to me in the airport and picked me up, princess style, my heart exploded with happiness. I'd been through so much in those past couple of weeks, and just being back in the arms of my boyfriend, who was so warm and caring, made me feel so healed. He spent every moment of the trip catering to me. Meeting his family went excellently. I got along with both of his parents right away. They turned out to be really fun, active people, and we did a lot of sightseeing where they took me to their favorite nature hikes and views. At one point, Eric took me on a hike, just the two of us, to his favorite secret waterfall. We skinny dipped together, swimming, laughing, and kissing for hours. It was one of the most romantic days of my life. I could not believe how perfectly the trip had gone, even though I was so worried before I left. But of course, when I got home, the nightmare with my sister resumed. A couple of days after I landed back in the US, I decided to head to the local police station to officially press charges against not only my sister, but my mom, for breaking and entering into my home. They'd had that man literally pick me up and toss me to the side so they could barge in, and I was not letting that slide. When I went to file the charge, I learned the CPS investigation into my sister was ongoing. I was frustrated. If they just spoke to my nephews, they would have understood what they'd been through. On top of that, my sister had been arrested with a guy who'd attacked multiple cops, so I didn't see how that didn't prove she was clearly an unfit parent. I left the police station content that the charges were filed, but incredibly frustrated. CPS hadn't resolved things yet. I just kept worrying about my nephew's safety. Being with strangers couldn't have been good for them, even if it was better than being with my sister. I also couldn't stop thinking about how my sister had dragged them out of my house without letting them grab anything. My youngest nephew had this little dog plushie he brought everywhere. I'd been sleeping with it ever since my sister had taken them away that day. And some mornings, it made me want to cry just to wake up and see that little plush dog looking back at me. My sister hadn't even let them put their shoes on. The poor little boys were probably so disoriented, so lost and abandoned. I just wanted to make things right for them, but I felt powerless until CPS made a decision. About a month after my sister's arrest, after calling CPS every single day demanding updates, they finally came to a conclusion. They had made a decision to officially remove both my nephews from my sister's custody and put them in protective care. When the CPS agent first explained this, I was annoyed. How was this any different? They said it now meant my sister was not only being taken to court, but she would have to go to court if she wanted custody back ever again. I asked the agent if it was likely she would win. The CPS agent told me it depended if any other more fitting relatives would show up to court and ask for custody. I knew immediately that's what I was going to do. I opened a separate court case to win custody of my nephews. I didn't care how long it took or how expensive the legal fees would be. I got the best lawyer I could afford. I knew it was one of the most difficult legal battles you could enter. But before the custody case even started, the case I had against my sister for breaking and entering began. I know some people might judge me for taking my own sister to court, but I literally would have fist fought her in a Wendy's parking lot at that point. but I figured I should follow the law if I ever wanted custody of my nephews. At the end of the day, that was my only goal. My sister out of the way and my nephews back home with me. On the first day of our trial, I saw my sister in court. It was the first time we'd seen each other since the day she'd broken into my house and let that man attack me. Our very last interaction had been me looking up at her, and her spitting a huge glob of spit directly into my face. So, it was fair to say neither of us were excited to see the other. The trial began, and eventually the judge mentioned that I had opened a custody case against her. I guess my sister's public defender hadn't informed her before then, and she was finding out for the first time in the courtroom. Well, my sister has never been one to react well to bad news. After the judge let the news slip, my sister completely snapped. Despite us being in the middle of a courtroom, my sister slowly angled her body towards me, screamed my name, and then pounced on me like some crazed hyena. She was clawing and scratching at my face, trying to rip out chunks of my hair. It didn't take long for the bailiff to pull her off me, but she managed to bite down extremely hard on my forearm right before he got to her. It was one of the worst pains I'd ever felt, and the bite looked nasty, eventually getting infected. All this happened right in front of the judge. Once everything calmed down, I knew my sister had just sealed her entire fate. It took months, almost 2 years actually, for all the criminal charges against my sister to pass and for her to finally get locked up for good. She was serving a life sentence, thanks to all her crimes stacked on top of each other, and there was no way she was seeing the light of day anytime soon, since her chances for appeal were so poor. I never dropped the breaking and entering charges against my mom. The only way my mom managed to stay out of prison was by testifying against my sister in court, throwing her under the bus. I don't think I've ever felt such sweet satisfaction as watching my mom blame my sister for everything, sobbing her usual crocodile tears. I could not believe my mom was finally betraying her perfect golden child, even though it had taken a lifetime, as well as the government's help. I knew that day, looking up at my mom on the stand, that it was the last time I was ever going to see her. It was the last time I wanted to see her. I had seen enough of her and my sister for a lifetime, and I was done with their constant toxicity. My sister had completely transformed my life into a never-ending legal battle, and I just wanted a normal day-to-day life again. The custody battle for my nephews dragged on. Their birth father and his family began fighting me in court for full custody, which just dragged the case out further. I didn't care. There wasn't a force on earth that could keep me from my nephews now that my sister was locked up. It took almost 2 years of legal battles, but eventually I won full custody over my boys and brought my nephews back home. I will never forget how big they smiled and how tight they hugged me when they came home and found the bedrooms I'd decorated for them. I walked into my youngest nephew's bedroom, and he ran to me, eager to show me his rediscovered Switch. I surprised him with his little plush doggy, and caught him in a tight hug when he fell into my arms. The next thing I knew, my eldest nephew joined us, and both boys cried into my hair, telling me how much they missed me. My eldest boy looked up at me, smiled with his big eyes full of tears and just said, "I knew it, Auntie. I just knew you would come back for us one day."